Welcome to another edition of Jazz Smack Postgame. Tonight, there is some big news because of the results of the NBA and what it means for the Jazz moving forward over the next month. Let's talk about it.
Jazz Smack, your source for information and analysis about the Utah Jazz and NBA basketball. Jazz Smack is a community for passionate Utah Jazz NBA fans.
For whatever reason, tonight, the Washington Wizards decided to win a game against the Sacramento Kings. And as a result of that, the Washington Wizards now have one more win than the Jazz on the season. So, it's completely 100% within the Jazz decision-making, these final 5 games of the season, if they want the number one position in the lottery going into the lottery. If they lose their remaining games, the Jazz have the number one position in the lottery as a result of having the fewest wins in the NBA. So all they have to do is lose the final 5 games. That number one position going into the draft lottery is theirs. So that is good news because I certainly think the Jazz are going to lose the final 5 games of the season. I don't think there's any doubt about that. So it's going to be theirs. If they win one of these final 5 games after the season they've just put all the fans through, I and a whole bunch of other people are going to say this is absurd. So I fully expect the team to lose these final 5 games, and the number one position going into the lottery will be the Jazz. Now, does that mean they end up with the number one pick? It's unlikely. It's still a 1 in 7 chance of getting the number one pick and selecting Cooper Flag. But it also limits their downside. So if they get that number one position in the lottery, the worst, if everything goes against them going into the lottery, they end up with the 5th pick. So they're kind of limiting their downside by losing these next 5 games. They're limiting their downside to that number 5 pick. Now, are they likely to get that number 5 pick? No, they're not likely to get that number 5 pick. But it's certainly a possibility. And with some luck, they luck into the number one spot, and the Jazz select Cooper Flag. We'll see what happens. But that is the biggest news because the Jazz have never had the worst record in the NBA, and now they have it. And now it's up to the ping pong balls, and they need to get lucky. That's the situation the team is in. They just need some good, really good luck. So anyway, that's the big news for the night, and I think this is what most people were hoping for. After sitting through this long year and watching some of these miserable games like tonight, I mean, let's face it, tonight was not pretty. Tonight, they lost by 38. Any game you lose by 38 in the NBA, in college, in any basketball game, you're losing by 38, that's a big loss, and that's a really difficult game to watch. The Jazz tonight, they shot 10 for 40 on three-pointers. So they take 43s, they make 10, they miss 30. Not great. It's just not a great viewing experience, but again, now we have something to look forward to. Let's hope this is one of those occasions where the number one team in the lottery, going into the lottery, the team with the worst record, actually ends up with the number one pick. That's what we can all hope at this point. That's like the saving grace for this entire long season of watching actually some pretty brutal basketball at times. Yeah, it's nice to watch guys develop. All these new guys that the Jazz have on their roster, it's nice to watch them develop. And that's kind of what you look for in these final 5 games. You still look for individual performances. You don't look at anything as far as the team goes. I mean, yes, I can't stand the way that the Jazz are doing some of these games with these huge losses, playing really poor defense. I mean, it drives me nuts, in all honesty. It just drives me nuts. And and Hardy has kind of mailed it in at this point too. I mean, there are long stretches now where the Jazz are just playing like terrible, and he's just sitting over there on the bench. He's not even standing up anymore. Like, I mean, obviously he's been given the nod that he needs to lose games, so I think he's lost interest. I mean, and I don't blame him for losing interest. I'd lose interest too. Who wants to lose? But the Jazz are in a situation where they have to try and find a top 10 player. They find a top 10 player, they're in a much better position to compete moving forward. So that's what the team had to do this year. But anyway, let's just go ahead and quickly look at the box score to actually see what took place in this kind of monstrosity of a game, because let's face it, this was an ugly one. I mean, it's hard to be, you don't want to be completely negative, but my goodness, watching a 40-point loss is not a pleasant experience. But I mean, the Jazz didn't particularly shoot really well from the field, and they obviously really struggled from three. The 2-point percentage was actually pretty good, but the 10 for 40 from three, that's brutal. And that really brought down the entire field goal percentage, so they shot 43% on the night. But still, I mean, there were some guys that shot the ball really well, and also some guys that had racked up some nice assist numbers with no or few turnovers. I mean, Colin Sexton shot the ball well tonight, and he also had 4 assists and 1 turnover. So that's a nice night. Yeah, he didn't get any, in 24 minutes, Colin didn't get any rebounds. But again, Colin is also, 6'1", something like that, and that's a player that's going to have, once in a while, he's going to have a night where he's going to have, 1 or 2 rebounds. In this case, he didn't get any, but he still shot. Colin still shot 8 for 14 from the field and scored 18 points and had 4 assists and one block and 1 turnover. I mean, 18 points, 4 assists in 24 minutes of playing time, that's a really good night from an offensive standpoint. Tonight, the biggest problem with the Jazz is their defense was non-existent. And again, another player that shot the ball really well and had really nice assist numbers, I mean, Isaiah Collier played great tonight. 7 for 11 from the field, 2 for 5 from 3, 6 for 8 from the free throw line, 5 rebounds, 10 assists, 1 block, no turnovers. I mean, those are awesome numbers. That's one of the better games that he's had in a while. I mean, 22 points, 10 assists, 5 rebounds. Spectacular stat line. And that's fantastic. So, again, the defense by the Jazz has been lacking the last few years, and it was no different tonight. It was just awful. But I don't... who knows if anything's going to change. It would be so much better if these last 5 games were a bit more competitive than this. I mean, my goodness, losing by 40, losing by 10 is one thing. Losing by 40 is another thing. And you don't need to ensure the loss, you don't have to lose by 40. I mean, it can certainly be more competitive than this. But it is what it is at this point. I mean, is anything going to change between now and the end of the season? I doubt it. There might be another couple close games, but it's more than likely there's going to be some more blowouts in the 30-point loss range, 25-30. There'll likely be some more really, really ugly losses. But still, the best news of the night, the Jazz are now, it's destiny is within their hands, so to speak, at least until we get to the lottery. Going into the lottery at that number one position is something that I think is a real positive for the franchise, and just hopefully luck falls with the Jazz this time. That's all we can say. It just needs to fall with the Jazz this time. I mean, if we end up with the 5th pick, that would be really disappointing, but we'll see what happens. This is part of the NBA process at this point in time. So Colin and Isaiah both shot the ball really well. Walker ended up having a decent night shooting the ball in terms of percentages. Kyle and Bryce didn't have their best games tonight. Bryce was 2 for 6 from 3, and Bryce has been shooting the ball. The previous 10 games, he's 60% from 3. He's been tearing it up. It just didn't go his way tonight. So he went 2 for 6 from 3. Kyle went 0 for 6 from 3. And Bryce was 2 for 10 overall, and Kyle was 3 for 14 overall. But Bryce did have 3 rebounds and 3 assists and 1 steal, so he did add, he did fill out some other areas of the box score. And Kyle also did get 11 rebounds, 1 assist, and 2 steals and 2 blocks. So he did as well. The other couple of guys who shot well overall for the most part, Keontae almost shot 50% tonight. He's 5 for 11 from the field, 3 for 8 from 3, 1 rebound, 1 turnover, no assists. And KJ Martin also got a bunch of dunks and layups. So he went 6 for 8 from the field, 1 for 1 on free throws, 3 rebounds, 2 assists. And so his box score is decent as well. But anyway, they're, like I said, the guys are just playing it out at this point. I mean, even though as a coach, the players on the floor, you coach them to win the game, all the players know what the deal is at this point. They all know the franchise is trying to lose, and the franchise is trying to lose for the best lottery position possible. And the whole entire roster knows that. And obviously that's a difficult situation to be in as a basketball player, as a competitive person. I mean, you don't get to the NBA by having no competitive nature for the most part. I mean, there are exceptions to that rule, but for the most part, these guys are ultra competitive and they don't want to lose. And the franchise has put the players in a situation where they are basically forced to lose by the rotations that are being played, by the players that the franchise is choosing to sit every night, and it's kind of out of the players' control as a whole whether they do win or lose. I mean, it's not within their control. I mean, if you put certain lineups on the floor, they have very little chance to win. Now, that's what the Jazz had to do because of the NBA system. But it's also very difficult for the players to get up for these games and be competitive and be motivated to play hard. I mean, who wants to go? Do you want to go into a rec league game and go in and say, well, we're going to lose tonight because of seeding in the playoffs of your rec league? No, you don't want to do that. I mean, regardless of seeding in the playoffs, you want to go out and you want to win the game. I mean, it's just human nature for all of us who've played a lot of. I mean, I don't want to lose a pickup game. It would drive me. Stuff like that drives me nuts. So I don't blame these guys. I don't blame these guys for mailing in it at this point. Like, it's been a really long season, and having the worst record in the NBA is difficult. You don't want to be on that team. And it's a really lousy position to put the players in. But that is the NBA system at this point, the way it's set up. And until Silver decides to change it, this is the game that the Jazz franchise has to play, because somehow, some way, they've got to find a top 10 player, and they increase their chances of doing that by getting a really high position going into the lottery. And so that's what they've chosen to do. And hopefully luck bounces their way and they're able to get that number 1 pick. But, odds are still against them to get that number 1 pick. Just hopefully we don't slide too much down from that number 1 pick. And also, obviously, there is a lot of skill that goes into evaluating these players. There is absolutely a ton of skill that goes into that. But there's also some luck with that too. I mean, let's face it, every GM misses on players. I mean, that's universal. Every GM has missed on players. There's no batting 100. There's no batting 1,000. It's not possible. So the Jazz need some little bit of luck with their selection as well. Whether that's Cooper Flagg, Ace Bailey, Dylan Harper, whoever the Jazz select, they need some luck. They need that player to stay healthy, and they need that player to develop, and they need that player to have, the right inner motivation. And you try and evaluate all those things up front, but like I said, you never bat 1,000, and there are going to be misses. And so the Jazz need some good fortune with whatever player they do select. We need some good fortune. That's what I'll say, because the Jazz desperately need that top 10 guy, a guy who has the potential to get in one of those top 10 slots in the NBA as a high value player. The Jazz have to get that. So anyway, I'm not going to drag this on tonight. Let's go ahead and look at the tankathon, since we did talk about the Wizards losing. So this is the current standing. So the Jazz have 16 wins, 61 losses. The Wizards have 17 wins, 59 losses. Charlotte is next with 19 wins, 57 losses. So that's where things stand. And it's unlikely that those three positions, those top three lottery positions, I do not think that those will change between now and the end of the season. I'm actually kind of shocked that Washington chose to win a game tonight, but I don't foresee those three positions changing at this point in time. I think that's where those three teams will end up, with the Jazz number 1, Washington Wizards number 2, and Charlotte number 3. And then New Orleans will come in at 4th, and Philadelphia probably at 5th, and Brooklyn probably at 6th. I think the position all these teams are in at the moment are probably where they do end up. I don't think there's going to be a lot of I don't foresee changes from this order, because I think those bottom teams are in a situation. I mean, yes, the Wizards lost tonight, but there's still a 2-game buffer between them and Charlotte. There's a 2-game buffer between Charlotte and New Orleans, or a 2-game buffer between New Orleans and Philadelphia, and the 2-game buffer between Philadelphia and Brooklyn, and then 3 games between Brooklyn and Toronto, and then 3 games between Toronto and San Antonio. So if you go down that line and look at where those teams are and how few games there are left, I mean, this is probably going to be the order for those top 8 teams going into the lottery. That's probably where they're going to end up. So we'll see what happens. Jazz just need some luck. That's all there is to it. They just need some luck. They need some luck on where they actually end up picking, and they need some luck with the person they do pick. We'll see what happens. But anyway, I think we will call it a night for tonight, because there's really not a whole lot else to talk about a game where the Jazz dropped one by 38 points. But anyway, we will talk to you after the next Jazz game. There are only 5 left, so we will see what happens. But please, for those watching on YouTube, please like, share, and subscribe. And you can also follow us on X at Jazz Smack. Anyway, we will talk to everybody later. Good night, everybody.